Okay, guys, we're going to talk about two policies here. This first one is policy 200-30. It's titled Ambulance Response and Communication. This one will be a replacement policy for what used to be the Reporting Ambulance Movement policy. So this is an updated version of that one. So this is the policy itself, this page and the next page. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we've broke each part of it out in the next several slides. But this is on the ePro system, so if you go into ESO and you go into websites, it's listed there in the policies along with all the other policies. So the purpose of this policy is to equip our dispatch center with operational knowledge of each unit's position and availability. It should help us to enhance patient care, allow for proper accounting and utilization of resources, and then maintain crew safety. And it identifies response time requirements. Pretty much so far, everything is old hat. It's stuff that's already been in the policy for years, except for the identifies response time requirements, and we specifically identified those out. So the policy itself, it says that it's a policy of EMS that NARMC EMS Dispatch be advised of location, destination, and status of all NARMC ambulances while they're on active duty. So it's the responsibility of the duty crew of that unit to provide the necessary information to dispatch during the course of daily operations. So we'll go through here every area that you're supposed to notify dispatch of, as far as where you're at, where you're going, that type of stuff, so they can kind of have an idea of where their units are so they can best respond to where the patient is. So we'll start with responding to calls. So for 911 calls or emergent transfers, posting for coverage, and 911 standbys, so like you have a structure fire or law enforcement is out and requests your assistance and you need to stand by, all of those type of things have a shoot time of less than 2 minutes. That's not an en route time of less than 2 minutes. That means you are actively driving your ambulance out of the bay doors within 2 minutes. Okay. Next, we go down to our non-emergency transfers and like return home calls, and we look for a max shoot time of 10 minutes. So if you get a transfer, it's a non-emergency BLS transfer, or you're taking somebody home or back to nursing home, that type of stuff, we want you to be en route to that call with less than 10 minutes. Okay. Events like standby events, school football games, your functions, races, rodeos, that type of stuff. We want you to be on site at the time that's listed on the schedule for that event. So usually we're going to get you there a few minutes before the event starts, sometimes up to 30 minutes. That way you guys are set up and ready to go by time it actually kicks off. And then the last piece on this page, so your response time, if you are greater than 2 minutes, so if you're greater than 2 minute average for responding to those 911 calls, then we're going to have a chat with you, let you know, hey, we need to figure out a way to speed this up, get you out the door so we're not delaying patient care. If it continues and the conversations haven't helped, then we will move down to disciplinary action if we can't solve the problem otherwise. So the communications that we're going to use, this is stuff that we use on a daily basis or stuff that's available for us to use on a daily basis. We start off with our electronic radio communication, which is Zello. That's what we're using right now. These are the phones that you carry with you. They're also the Zello radios that are in the ambulance. These are our primary means of communication between the units and dispatch. Backup wise, we have the UHF VHF radio system, so we use that as a backup if for some reason Zello's down. And also we use that for contacting flight service or somebody on one of the other radio frequencies, some of the fire departments, things like that. After that, we have the EMS cell phone. So that's the phone that you actually carry on you, those little phones that some people love, some people hate, but they're the Sonums. That is given to you by EMS for you to conduct EMS duty on. So you receive your pages through it, all that type of stuff. We would strongly encourage you to use those Sonum phones as your primary source of communication for job-related stuff, like when you call a radio report in to a hospital, if you call dispatch for extra information or to give them a heads up of what's going on. It would be better if you used those Sonum phones. We're not saying that you're forbidden from using your personal phones, but if you use your personal phone, we just need you to know that FOIA laws, if somebody wants a Freedom of Information Act and they want to get into our communications and that type of stuff, usually it'll be in some legal matter for them to get that far. But if you've conducted any sort of business on your personal device, your entire device is subject to that Freedom of Information Act. And it can be taken and they can keep as long as they want to go through whatever information they want to get off of it for whatever case they're preparing, whatever. And then you may get it back at some point. So just, it's very rare, probably not going to happen, but you need to know that anytime you use your personal phone for business related purposes, you're putting yourself out there for them to gather your phone and anything on your phone, not just the business related stuff. So that's why we say we would prefer that you use those Sonum phones. When you speak to dispatchers about information regarding calls, or you need to come and post, things like that, call a recorded line in dispatch, and the dispatchers should be using the dispatch phones to make those phone calls and not using their personal cell phones. The dispatchers for ambulance-related business, dispatch-related business, have been told repeatedly that they are not to use their personal cell phones to make those phone calls. There's some liability into it as well as the FOIA stuff, and then you get into he said, she said stuff when you're talking on non-recorded lines, especially for business purposes. So we're going to get into some of the times that you need to contact dispatch and give them information. So ambulance movement is one of them. So anytime the ambulance leaves the station, if you're leaving the station in that ambulance, you should be letting dispatch know you're going to be out of station. If you're heading to a call, a transfer, heading to the hospital, or you're just heading to go get something to eat, you need to let them know that you are out of the station or you're en route, that type of stuff. When you leave the ambulance, other than with patient contact, so you're out of the ambulance for, you're going in a store, you're running in a convenience store, you're grabbing lunch, whatever, out on handhelds is fine. We use that. Most of you guys use that pretty good. It just lets us know that you're out of the truck, you're not on official business, but if you don't answer right away, to give you a call because, you know, maybe you're in a bad radio zone or whatever. The only thing I would ask on this is if you're out on handheld and you're quite a ways from where you normally would be, say if you go up to Walmart instead of at the station, you're probably not going to be the closest call or the closest unit to some of the calls closer to the station. So letting dispatch know if you're out on handheld, if you're going to be on like far north end of town or south end of town, that type of stuff, so that, you know, really the biggest ones are the college and Walmart. They put you out of your normal area where you're going to be responding from and So if they don't realize that you're that far out, they may drop a call on you without looking at the map, and that's going to give you a delayed response. So be sure you're letting them know if you're significantly out of the area. So continuing with ambulance movements, when you leave a location, you need to let them know that. So emergency calls, transfers, private errands, so when you're back at station or whatever. When you enter back into the NARMC service area without a patient, so you take somebody to Cox Branson or Cox South, and you're coming back, when you cross that state line, you should let them know that you are back in the service area. I've had some feedback that, well, they've got these maps and they should know where we're at. And that's true, but when they're busy, those maps aren't always 100% updated and they don't always have time to look up at them. But if they had just heard that you are back in state and something comes out in Omaha, you're probably the closest unit. So that kind of gives them an idea of who's the closest unit and keeps them informed operationally of where we're at. Also, when you get back into the city of Harrison, it says county. We've never really pushed the county, but getting back into the state, getting back into the city, that type of stuff, getting back into our service area, those are things that we need to notify dispatch of, keep them operationally aware so that we can send the most appropriate unit to any call that comes in. So when you arrive back at your home station, whether it be Harrison or one of the outstations, you need to let them know you're back at the station. When an ambulance is out for refueling, we want to know that. And then anytime you're patient loaded, we need a beginning and an ending mileage. That way we know how many miles you traveled, so we bill the patient appropriately. Some additional stuff, when the page is received and the crew goes en route to the call or the unit, we need to know that. So let them know that you're en route. This doesn't mean that you're sitting on the toilet and you'll be en route in a few minutes. It means you are actively moving towards your ambulance. That is en route to the call. Middle of the night, we understand potty breaks, whatever you need to do, but we also need to be timely in getting to these emergency calls. So this is one way for us to make sure that we're timely and make changes where we need to. We've had some times in the recent past where a unit has gone en route and it's 6, 7, 8 minutes before they actually pull out of the bay. They shouldn't have gone en route if they weren't actively moving towards the truck to get out of the bay and get heading towards the call. We expect a little bit of delay from the time you go en route if you're not sitting in your truck, but anything over a minute is really too long. It doesn't take that long to get out to the bay. Also, anytime you guys have a malfunction during the course of a call that is going to interfere with your ability to treat that patient on that call, you should notify dispatch. You should notify them. They're probably going to ask you if you didn't tell them. Rather, you need another ambulance or another crew to respond. Use your judgment. If you're able to make it happen, say the blood pressure on the monitor won't work, but you can take a manual. Okay, that's not a big deal. But if you can't access your cot, you can't get your patient into your ambulance safely or efficiently, or you can't provide the treatment that that patient's going to need because that piece of equipment's down, you need to let them know and have somebody coming out with replacement equipment or with a replacement unit to care for that patient. And let them know when you first notice it. Don't wait around for 20, 30, 40 minutes or until you're ready to load the patient to let them know. All that's doing is delaying patient care and adding hardship to the patient and the crew. You also have to communicate with the hospital, giving them a radio report, Pulsera report, whichever facility we're going to, however that works, whether it's radio, Pulsera, cell phone. We also want to know if the scene's unsafe or if you can't access a patient. If it's unsafe, you probably need to stage and have law enforcement come in. If you can't access the patient, then what do you need dispatch to get headed your way to be able to access that patient? The longer you wait to let them know about these instances, the more delay your patient care is going to be, because nobody's heading out to help you if you haven't called and let us know that we need to have someone headed in there. So just keep all that in mind. Again, all of this stuff is already in policy and has been for years. This is just kind of a reminder of what's in there. So just a few more things that you're going to want to dispatch or notify dispatch about. Some scene dynamics. If you've got a violent person on scene, you need extrication assistance, you need additional units, your vehicle's malfunctioned and you can't continue the call, or you're not sure if you can continue the call. You have an equipment malfunction, remember that's going to be interfering with patient care. You have a motor vehicle collision, and this includes deer strikes. I can't tell you how many deer strikes we've had where we've had a very strong impact with a deer, and the ambulance would slow down by a couple of miles an hour and then take off again within just a few seconds and never stop and look at damage. If you have a deer that runs into the side of your ambulance, probably didn't damage anything that's going to stop you from continuing your call if you're patient loaded and you need to get to the hospital. However, if you have a front impact and say the deer pierces your radiator and you decide to be one of these people that just continues driving like nothing happened at 70, 80 miles an hour, and I say that because we've got video proof that that actually happens. What happens when you're 5 miles down the road, your engine overheats, and then your engine blows and you can't go anywhere? You're stuck because you didn't take the 5-10 seconds it would have taken to look around the truck and see if you have flat tires, radiator fluid, or pieces hanging down that are going to impede your ability to continue with your mission. It just takes a few seconds, and anytime we have a significant deer strike or any kind of accident, we should check our truck and make sure that we're capable of moving forward in that call or in that response that we are in. Anytime we have an injury to staff on a call, we need to let dispatch know that it occurred, and rather we need to send a replacement, or if they're going to be seen when they get to the ER or what. Safety concerns, if you're on scene and you're not sure that you're safe and you need somebody there, law enforcement, fire, whoever, let them know and request that. The big piece that's going to come into play here shortly, if we have a refusal, so you've got a refusal and you're going to do a telehealth visit, as soon as you know that that's the way this is probably going to go, you need to let dispatch know. Those telehealth visits, when we get them in play, they're going to take 8 to 10 minutes longer than what our normal scene time would be for a refusal. And that's just on an average. So letting dispatch know that you're going to have a possible telehealth visit as soon as possible lets them know that they can't count on you to come back available and run another call in a short amount of time, because you're going to be talking with the doctor and the patient and then doing whatever the doctor has you do afterwards. So just that in itself is going to really help dispatch to kind of make those decisions of, do I take this transfer now because they're going to become available pretty quick, or do I hold the transfer off, or do I send this truck on that 911 call and then have Diamond City come in and stage or whatever. So there's quite a bit of stuff that goes into this that some of us may not realize. And then anytime you have communication issues, your radio system's down, you need to use our backup VHS or VHF, UHF systems, or you need to use a different form of communication because your Zello's not working or whatever the case may be. You need to let dispatch know that as well. If you're out there, you have no communications, we can't track you, or the tracker's not working, and something happens to you, who knows how long it's going to be before somebody comes out to see how you are, especially depending on how far out you are. So let them know that stuff's going on. So this piece, there are two new things that we put in this policy, and that's kind of why we changed the name to make it more appropriate or more accurate. Anytime that you have more than one patient, you really ought to let dispatch know that you have multiple patients. If you don't need a second ambulance, let them know that too. But if you show up and you've got 10 patients, that's probably something to let them know so we can prepare to look for, do we need to look at an MCI type of incident, or are they a bunch of code green refusals? What are we going to be looking at there? The other piece is this triage piece. The triage is within the first 2 minutes of patient contact, and in all honesty, it's just down and dirty, sick, not sick. It should honestly take less than 30 seconds, just a quick triage, and then you're done. We'll go through this a little more and give you a little more detail on that. So with triage, is it like MCI triage? Well, yes, but no, not exactly. So on the left here, you see a bus probably had multiple patients, right? If those patients, if there were several of them that were alive in there, then you're looking at a triage situation. That's your MCI triage. On the other side of the page, you got this one guy laying under a bus. That bus backs over him. That's the kind of triage we're talking about. We're not talking multiple patients, start triage. We're talking you've got one patient or 2, 3 patients maybe, and you're just going to triage each patient or that one patient that you have, just to give an idea of sick, not sick right away. So we look at this as daily triage is what we refer to it as. So it's every single patient we contact every single day that we're at work, right? You're just going to report it to dispatch, and then really we're looking at that first 2 minutes, okay? If you take longer than 2 minutes, we're not going to hang you by your toes. If you are 15, 20, 30 seconds into the call, then that's pretty good. That's where you probably should be. 2 minutes is quite a long time to make up a decision of first impression, sick, not sick type of deal. We'll get more details as we go through this. So as with any change, anytime that we add anything extra to you guys, the first thing that people think is, well, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? This is stupid. And believe me, I've already heard all of those comments, and that's perfectly fine. We like to hear the feedback, positives, negatives, it doesn't matter because we're not perfect. We just need to move forward and make it better. So why on this? There's a few pieces of it. So better the communication. Dispatch actually will have an idea, so will those admin that are listening to the call, plus even fire department listens to our traffic. And so everybody that's potentially going to be involved in getting you help or not sending extra resources you don't need are going to have a better idea of what is actually going on your scene. Because we all know we get called out to an accident that's a head-on collision and there's bodies thrown everywhere, and you get there and there's 4 or 5 people standing on the side of the road and they were going 5 miles an hour and barely nicked the mirrors or something, and nobody's injured. At that point, I've got 5 code green patients. I mean, just right there, you just triaged 5 patients without even touching them, just with looking at them. And now dispatch knows I don't need to be sending 2 or 3 extra units. Fire knows I don't need to be sending an extra engine or an extra, truck out there to help or whatever. Jason and I are not going to be heading out there. Or if you get there and you're like, man, I've got 5 code red or possible code red patients, then we're going to be moving because those are serious patients and you're going to be needing more resources. If you do need more resources, a lot of times dispatch is going to ask you if you need additional help. If you have one of those deeper colors such as red, blue triages, that type of stuff, especially with multiple patients. Or you can just say that you need additional resources, or are any first responders available, is fire on their way, whatever you might need. This will help us in our QA/QI process to kind of see initially how sick or how not sick the patient is. And if we're listening in, which a lot of us do every day, to all the calls, and we hear one goes out that's a critical call, so you call back, say it's a code red critical call, we're probably going to QA that one. It's going to kind of put us on the radar of, well, this is probably a serious one that we should look at. Or one of those that comes in is it's such a horrible call and the world's ending, and you get out there and there's nothing wrong. We'll QA that from the other side and look at it as, so how did it get through our process of dispatch and all that, and come out that it was so much worse than it really was. So there's quite a bit of review and QA that we can do with this. More accurate resource management, we've kind of discussed that a little bit. And then the big thing for most of us is practice and prepare for that MCI event. Some of us will get lucky and we'll never have a multi-casualty incident in our career, and others are going to have to deal with it. And if you've never been in one of those multi-casualty incidents, then you probably don't quite understand how difficult it is to do triage in that instance. If you've never done a triage of any kind before, remembering your color codes, remembering, what they mean and all of that type of stuff is very difficult when you're standing there looking at a insurmountable pile of people that you've got to figure out who's sick, who's not sick, who goes first, who can hang out and live a little bit longer on scene so that somebody else gets where they need to go. That's a big piece of it. The more you triage, the more you practice it, the better you get with it, the easier it is when you get in that place where you're actually in over your head, and now you're actually able to do the triage job effectively and quickly because you're used to it. So those are kind of a few of the reasons that we're putting this into play. There may be tweaks every once in a while if something's not working, but we'll work through those as we go. When we looked at triage codes and what triage codes do we think would be smart to use, we wanted to keep as close to the MCI triage codes to your START triage as we possibly could. So everything is based around those codes as far as your green, yellow, your red, and your black. We did add a blue for those patients that are in cardiac arrest and you're actively working to resuscitate them. But that's the only thing that's different as far as color-wise from the START triage system. The criteria is just a little different. We're not just going off of the RPM method. We're going to do a little bit more look. The big thing is this is not an exact science. Don't be scared that, hey, if I say yellow and all of a sudden my patient, when I get closer to them or I get more of an assessment done, turns into a red or turns into a green, it's the end of the world and everybody thinks I'm an idiot. We don't care, okay? We want it to be as accurate as possible, so we have resources to you that you need so that we kind of have an idea of what's going on, how long you're going to be tied up, that type of stuff. But it's not an exact science. You're going to triage somebody and they're going to become worse the longer you get into that care, and that's fine. You can re-triage and just let dispatch know, hey, my patient is now code red, or you can up triage. We had one today that was code blue and they re-triaged to code red because they got ROSC. Now you don't have to re-triage. All we're asking is an initial triage of how bad is your patient upon your arrival. That's what we're looking at. And it's going to change. It's never going to be the same. Probably the biggest thing that we're going to have is a code yellow. I mean, that's kind of a safe zone for most people kind of right in the middle, and that just ultimately seems like where most patients are going to fall. We'll have a significant amount of greens. Reds are going to be few and far between. So it's just a quick, dirty triage. It's not an exact science. So don't get stuck on your triage. Do it as quickly as you can. You don't need vital signs for it. You need to look at your patient and see how do they look, what's their skin color, do they look like they're struggling to breathe, do they look like they're gonna be okay, do they have a strong radial pulse, do they have a radial pulse, or are they unresponsive, what's going on, that type of stuff. Just a real early sick, not sick assessment. So when we get into our color codes, we're going to start with code green. We kind of start at the bottom and work our way up. So code green, we all understand walking wounded is code green, right? These are low priority patients. They've got minor illnesses or minor injuries. You don't really see a life threat. They're a very stable patient. They may have like a isolated fracture, say an ankle fracture or fingers, arm, whatever, but it's all closed. It's isolated. You're not suspecting hemorrhage or anything major. Or illnesses, and they've got normal skin tone, normal vital signs, and these are the patients we're looking at, and it's like, I could probably leave you here, not take you to the hospital, and you'd probably be just fine, unless it's the broken bone, and they do need to go see somebody. But they're not dying, and if you left them there, they're not going to die. They're probably going to be uncomfortable if it's broke. But these are the minor patients, okay? Now, if you've got somebody that's more significant than this, then we'll move on to the next category. So once we move up from code green and we get into the more sick patients, we move into this yellow category, which is kind of your delayed priority. There's something wrong with these patients. They've got a moderate illness or injury. They could become worse, but right now they are not dying. Like at this moment in time, this patient is not dying. But if I leave them alone and I don't treat them and I don't get them treatment, they may get there. So they need a ride to the hospital. They need more advanced treatments. Vital signs are probably slightly abnormal, or skin color is a little abnormal, something like that. These patients will probably need some sort of treatment by us, or we suspect that their condition is going to deteriorate in the near future and they're going to need that treatment. They probably need to go to the emergency room. We're going to take them there regardless, no matter what triage code they are. As far as the living patients, we're not going to ever push them not to go to the hospital. Our job is to take them to the hospital, and that's what we're going to offer each and every one of these. This triage code is just kind of a way of letting us know how sick, not sick, how bad, or how minor this patient appears to be. And like I said earlier, everything can change, okay? So this code red is going to be really a fairly rare instance that we're going to have a code red. These patients would be considered immediate priority or a critical patient. They've got some kind of a major injury or illness that is critical in nature, and it poses an immediate and rapid threat to their life. Their vital signs are probably bad, or maybe they're compensating, but they're not going to compensate forever. You need to do immediate interventions to maintain their vital signs, to maintain their airway, and get them to the hospital type of patients. These are any patient that is in a rapid threat for loss of life or loss of limb. So if you've got a patient who's got an open fracture and no pulse below the opening, they probably are a code red, because are they going to die from it? Probably not right now, but is that arm dying with no pulse? Yeah, it sure is. So life or limb, obviously if it's a finger, probably not a code red. You're probably more in the yellow zone. But if your arm's hanging off or you've got an amputation of a large body piece, you're probably in that red area. Or if you've got a status asthmaticus patient and albuterol and all that stuff is not working, and you've tried your epi and it's not working, you're afraid this patient's headed towards the light, then they're probably a code red, and you probably ought to get them off the scene and to the hospital as rapidly as possible. Generally, with your code red and your critical patients, you want a scene time of 10 minutes or less. You want to get them to the hospital. That's where they need to be, is where they can get the care that they need. So major things that are going to take a long time that you can do by yourself, such as starting an IV, that type of stuff, in the back of the ambulance would probably be the preferred place, unless you have to get them to a point where they're actually going to survive to the ambulance, get them that stabilization they need. You're expecting that this patient, if you don't transport them quickly or you don't get your treatments done quickly, that they're probably going to pass away or lose a limb. So code red should be reserved for those critical patients. So we show up on scene and we've got a patient who is dead, right? No pulse, no respirations, and this patient meets our withhold resuscitation protocol. We are not going to start CPR on them. They're basically going to lay there until a coroner or a funeral home comes and gets them. These patients are your code black, so they're your deceased patients. You are not doing CPR on them. They don't really require an ambulance. They require a mortician or a coroner, really. That is your code black population. If you are going to be doing resuscitation measures on these patients, then they fall into the code blue category, which is the only category we have that is outside of what your start triage has. And we'll go over that here in the next slide. But a black patient code black means they are dead. You are not attempting to resuscitate them. Now you can, if you resuscitate or attempted resuscitation and then the patient, you call the patient dead on scene, then you could retriage to code black at that point, if you're not doing any further resuscitation and they are dead. Code blue is the cardiac arrest and I'm resuscitating this patient. That's your triage code for CPR is in progress, the patient's pulseless and apneic, you're actively resuscitating the patient. If you're no longer resuscitating the patient, or family was attempting to resuscitate the patient, you show up and they're in rigor and you're not going to work it, then they're a black. If you're going to work it, say they're not in rigor and they're viable patient, then you're going to work it, that's a code blue. So code blue, we use it all the time, even though it's technically until now not something that we've got a term for, but code blue is active cardiac arrest patient. All right, so we've gone through quite a bit of stuff. The biggest changes truly are the triage component. There's some policy changes that have gone into place. This is really the biggest one, the triage, and then actually putting in writing that 2-minute response time for 911 calls. We reiterated quite a bit that you need to contact dispatch with information on where you're at, where you're headed to, that type of stuff. And that policy has been in place forever. We didn't change very much at all on that part of this policy, so most of that should have been review. If it wasn't review, you probably ought to take a look at your policies and get to know them a little better. You're expected to abide by them, so just keep that in mind. The triage piece, just remember it's not exact. It's a quick first impression of this patient. How bad are they? And if you're off, you're off. It's not going to be the end of the world. It gives some clarity on the dispatch side, on additional responders, that type of stuff. But it's not going to be the end of the world if you say code red and really you're a code yellow, or code yellow you're really a code green, or vice versa. Probably the biggest thing on this triage piece that I see, or that I have seen in the past, as far as issues, are if you have a patient that is unresponsive, they are not automatically a code red because they're unresponsive. We have unresponsive diabetics that we push a little D50 and they're awake. Or we have an unresponsive person who, maybe it's a psychiatric issue, maybe it's some kind of drug abuse or overdose situation, but their skin looks good, they're breathing good, their vital signs are great. They're just taking a nice little nap. I tell you, I'm unresponsive every night when I go to bed. I close my eyes, eventually I fall asleep, and I'm unresponsive until my alarm goes off in the morning. So just because your patient is not awake does not mean that they're code red. If they are laying in a puddle of blood and they're unresponsive, they're probably a code red. Or if they have snoring respirations and they're pale or completely clammy and pale and their pulse is weak, you may be code red with that patient. If they're perfectly fine, other than they're just not awake and everything else looks great, they're probably a code yellow. Just kind of keep that stuff in mind. We'll work through all of this stuff, and it's a learning process. Nobody's expected to remember it every single time, especially getting off the get-go here, and nobody is expected to be perfect on the triage codes every single time. This is going to help us immensely prepare for that day that nobody wants to come, but inevitably it's going to come for some of us, where we have to do a mass casualty triage. And if nothing else, this is going to help you be a better patient care provider in that situation if you get stuck on triage. So the second policy that we're hitting up on this training is our minimum equipment policy. So this one has been in place for a lot of years, and we are changing one piece of it, basically adding something to the end of it. Nothing else in this policy has changed. It is all the same. So if you know it, you know it. If you don't, then here you go. So this basically outlines what equipment we have to bring in on every single call for our patients, okay? The crew members, it says, will take all appropriate equipment from the ambulance to the patient location on all emergency calls and interfacility transfers. Okay, so if you show up to a patient that's in cardiac arrest and CPR is in progress and you walk in with nothing, you're in violation of this policy. Also, you are liable for any extra damages that the family or anybody else could say may have happened from your delay in patient care because you came in without the proper equipment. Now that's an extreme example, but it happens. It has happened here. Or if you go into a cardiac arrest case and you've got a monitor in your hand, and that is it. The only reason you're walking in like that, in most people's opinion, is to assess for asystole so you don't have to work the code and you can call the patient a code black. So equipment is very important to make sure you've got the right equipment. So this policy says exactly what you should bring in on your calls for a minimum standard. This is what you have to bring in. You can bring in more if you feel like you need it, and we'll go through that. So this is stuff that goes in on every single 911 call. And I've got this exception for hike-ins. If you have a hike-in, we don't expect you to carry that giant ALS bag, and we don't expect you to carry the monitor all the way down there unless you need all of that stuff. We've got those black hike-in bags in each truck. There should be 2 bottles of water and probably some very stale energy bars in there of some sort for you, and then you would put whatever equipment you feel like you need based on the information you have in that bag so you can go and treat your patient while you're out there in the wild, wherever it may be, and while you're tracking up the trail to get them back. But outside of a hike-in, on any 911 call, the crew member on an ALS truck, you should bring in the jump bag and the monitor. No exceptions. 911 call, unless it's a hike-in, jump bag and monitor. If you're a BLS crew, the jump bag and the AED. If dispatch didn't tell you that it's a cardiac arrest patient, we don't really care. This is the minimum equipment that you're going to bring into that call, so you're ready. Dispatch gets the best information they can, and they do a great job. But they don't always get the best callers with the best information. Especially in some of these rural areas, you may get somebody that says, I need an ambulance, and hangs up the phone on you and won't answer back. Or you may get Newton County's dispatcher who refuses to send you a caller or is unable to send you the caller for whatever reason, or you have a bad cell area. So we don't always know exactly what's going on scene. There have been instances where we've been paged out for a fall, no injury, lift assist, and you get there and the patient's in cardiac arrest. If you don't have the equipment that you need, and this is our minimum standard, then all of that liability falls on your shoulders. So we expect you to bring this equipment in, and there's a policy that's been in place long before I ever came here of the exact minimum equipment. So jump bag and your monitor, or the jump bag and your AED. Those go in on every 911 call. Some optional equipment that you guys need to at least think about when you're going in on a call. So the cot, we'd like you to bring that cot in on every call so that when we go in with the intent of transporting our patient, we've also got a means to transport that patient. However, we don't live on the straightest roads. We don't live where everybody has a yard that is perfectly flat and well maintained and nobody has stairs, right? So we understand that the cot cannot go in on every single call initially, and on some calls it never goes in, it sits out in the yard. We understand that, but at least consider whether you need the cot or not as you're going into the call. If you're going to a nursing home where you're going to be transporting a patient and you're going through a facility to get to them, or a public school, something like that, probably a really good idea to bring that cot. Otherwise, you're going to be walking back out a long ways and walking back in a long ways to get that to the patient, and that's just delaying your patient care and transport. Consider a stair chair if you've got someplace that has a lot of stairs, and any other transport devices that you think you may need. I know a lot of us carry the mega movers or patient movers under the head of the cot. Grab that if you think you'll need it, that type of stuff. So just think your way through these calls as far as optional equipment that you need to bring. If you've got a cardiac arrest patient and they're doing CPR, you may think about bringing in the Lucas. I mean, bring your own firefighter with you so that you're not breaking your back to do these compressions, and it's going to do them a lot better for a lot longer. And then bring in whatever other equipment you might need, your IO or whatever. So think about this stuff ahead of time so it's not always a reaction, because reactionary slows the process. If you plan ahead, then you're going to be better off. So along with that, some additional optional equipment is something based on the dispatch information that you get. Whatever they say, for some reason, makes you think you need to bring in an extra piece of equipment. By all means, bring it in. You can always carry it back out to the ambulance if you didn't need it, or have somebody else on scene carry it back out to the ambulance for you if you didn't need it. You've got sometimes first responders, generally firefighters if you're in the city, or I guess your partner's going to make a couple trips back in to get stuff. But if you feel like you're going to need it for the patient, why delay that process if you don't have to? Remote locations and hike-ins, we already talked about that a little bit. Taking your hike-in bag. Your lead provider should deem what to put in that hike-in bag if you guys are going in or not. And then based on what your understanding of the scene is at that equipment, or on that at that time, to take whatever equipment you think you're going to need in. Are you always going to be right? No, probably not. But at that point, that was the best information you had, so go with it. if you're sent out on a transport or a transfer from a facility to another one, your cardiac monitor should go in no matter what. Not only for cardiac monitor, but vital signs, pulse ox, all that stuff. So take that in, and any additional equipment that you need based on what dispatch is sending you to. If you're going for a patient that is intubated, then you probably should bring some kind of ventilator in, some kind of equipment to continue breathing for that patient, right? So bring in that equipment with you. If you know you're going to need it, bring it up with you. Don't just walk in and then go back out and get all your equipment one piece at a time. You're just delaying everything. So bring in what you feel like you're going to need based on what dispatch tells you. So this is really the only piece that is brand new in this entire policy. And we added this as a result of ambulances being swapped out, and then they get on a call and they don't have the equipment they need to take care of that patient. And whose fault is that? Well, honestly, it's that crew's fault. You need to think about those things. So we added this to the policy. If you are swapping units, ALS units, you need to have an IV pump, you need to have a ventilator, you should have your Lucas or CPR device, and you should swap your NARC kit into your new truck, whatever you're swapping into. BLS units, really the only thing in here that falls in that realm is the Lucas or CPR device. Make sure that the unit that you've got has that. If you're moving into a unit and they've got the IV pump, they got a ventilator, they've got a Lucas, all you need to bring is your narcotics kit. But if they don't, you need to make sure this equipment's there, because it does come in handy from time to time, and we need to have it on the units. Outside of that, really there's nothing new to this policy, but just remember that your monitor and your first in bag or jump bag go in on every 911 call that you go to, okay? Big pet peeve of mine, and it's happened a couple of times, but one time fairly recently, I show up to a call that I chased, and it was a CPR in progress on a newborn. Show up just behind the ambulance, the paramedic's already upstairs, the EMT is on their way back down the stairs, goes out to the ambulance to get equipment. What equipment were they getting? Well, they were getting a stethoscope. That's what the medic told them to go grab. Got up there, and thank God they had already, the family and caretakers that were there, had already got the patient back to breathing, and they had a pulse and all that. But we walked in there with nothing. I mean, that crew, when they first showed up, the only thing that they could have done for that patient was chest compressions. They didn't bring a BVM so they could breathe for that patient. They didn't bring a monitor so that they could put the patient on the monitor and defibrillate if they needed to. They brought nothing in to take care of that patient. And then when they went back out for more equipment, the only thing the medic requested was a stethoscope. There was no intention in my mind of appropriately caring for that patient, because we didn't care enough to bring the equipment that we were going to need to take care of that patient in a worst case scenario. And really, in a minor patient, we didn't even have the equipment that we needed to take care of that patient. It was a very frustrating situation. I've been on a few of those, and that puts our service as a huge liability, plus it puts the providers on scene at a huge liability, not only professionally but personally. So we need to take care of ourselves by taking care of our patient. And a lot of that comes down to take the appropriate equipment in so you don't delay patient care, and so you can actually care for your patient. I'm going to get off my soapbox, but that's pretty much the gist of all of this. All right, so you guys are probably pretty happy to hear this, but that's all. That's it. Those are the changes. That's the reminders of all of the nuances of each of these policies. Most of it has been in place for a long time, with a few changes. If you guys have any questions or any concerns or anything that you need clarification on, don't hesitate to contact a supervisor, contact Jason or myself or Scotty, and we'll be happy to help you out. We know this is a learning process. It's going to take a while to get to where everything's perfect, but we're working on it, we're trying it, and we just need you guys to help us out and be patient and let us know when something doesn't work so that we can figure out a way to make it work or make it better for the entire service. So we appreciate you all for all you do, and I'm going to shut up and let you guys go. Thank you.